Underwater the whole time. We recognize that the Hogan Administrative Center occupies the land of the Ho-Chunk people. Please take a moment to celebrate and honor this ancestral Ho-Chunk land and the sacred lands of all Indigenous peoples. Will the secretary please call the roll?
Ms. Bowman?
Here.
Ms. Berkedal?
Here.
Dr. Garcia?
Here.
Mr. Jackson?
Here.
Dr. Jimenez?
Here.
Mr. Neumeister?
Here.
Mr. Korberg?
Here.
Dr. Sprague?
Here.
Ms. Sukla?
Here.
A quorum of the Board of Education is present, so the regularly scheduled meeting of July 17th, 2023 is called to order. We will now have the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand and face the American flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
So tonight's agenda has previously been distributed to the board with a motion by Mr. Korberg and a second by Dr. Jimenez. We will approve the agenda as submitted unless there's a motion to amend. Hearing none, the motion has carried. Our next item on the agenda is our public speakers, and tonight we have two. So it is the policy of the board to provide at its public meetings an opportunity for individuals to address the board. Comments about individual staff or personnel will not be allowed. Open meeting law prohibits the board from engaging in discussion or responding to matters not included on the agenda. All speakers are reminded that this same policy limits your time to speak to 5 minutes. This limit will be strictly enforced. May I ask the superintendent to keep track of the time and notify the speaker when time is running out?
I will.
You are also asked to give your name and the school district where you reside at the beginning of your time for the public record. Our first speaker tonight is Peter Burke.
Should be Serena.
Is Serena Burke.
My name is Serena Burke, and I am a local for La Crosse School District. So, good evening, everyone. Attention La Crosse School Board and members present of the La Crosse School Administration. My husband Pete and I are here for our son Ruben. He is a student currently enrolled in Spence Elementary. He has recently turned 6 in June, and he has been a kindergartner. He has been seeing speech and language for the past 3 years for developmental communication delay. Recently, he has had a reevaluation of the La Crosse School District that concluded he is academically behind. As parents, we would like to retain him in kindergarten, but as current policy, we are not able or allowed to have our son do this. Dating back towards the end of 4K back in 2022, we relied on the teaching of staff that concluded that Ruben was significantly not progressing for kindergarten, but then he later throughout the year became able to progress and move on. It was advised then that he move on to kindergarten. However, we did not want to hold him back because we knew that he would probably progress eventually. Well, as he got into kindergarten here in fall of 2022, our meeting as an IEP team and his regular teacher, it was stated to us that he has been behind academically and with his communication. It was at this time we mentioned to his IEP team we thought about the possibility of retention. Nothing was mentioned to us at this moment about the current policies regarding retention for the students of La Crosse. Because of the teaching staff, they were not able then to address it, bring it up, or suggest any recommendations or no recommendations at all. So through collective discussion in this meeting, we as a team agreed that we see how he progresses through the kindergarten school year. Then policy had never been brought up at this time. Again, nothing was stated at that time of the policy. Wouldn't you, as elected officials of the board, want your staff in the Crosse School District, who are the experts of the students who they see every day, be able to give feedback to the parents? Now fast forward to March of 2023, parent-teacher conferences were again happened, and we met as an IEP team. It was stated that Ruben was making little progress academically in his communication compared to his classmates. At this time, we asked about the retention for our son, Ruben. The response that we were given from the school psychologist was, well, per policy, we cannot give any recommendations or our thoughts regarding this. And I stated, well, that kind of sounds like politics to me. And the physical reaction in the room from each individual of the team, their lips were sealed and their heads were down. But from that, we could tell from their body language of that state that there was no disagreement with our thoughts of retaining our son. Then they stated that we could not give any recommendations, but it was ultimately up to us as parents. He is our son. So my husband asked what more we could do to hire like a tutor or resources to help support the teaching staff with his communication and disability outside the school system. The occupational therapist stated, we are doing everything we could to let him be a kid. At the conclusion of the meeting, we agreed upon a reevaluation of our son, Ruben. There were no copies, other forms, or explanation of the policies. Nothing was handed to us in paper, and nothing more was discussed. During the reevaluation, as parents, we were doing our own data searching, our own questioning what would be best for our child, and what would make it right for him and his future. We looked up on the internet what the policy was, and there seemed to be 2 policies that could be followed that we found.
30 seconds remaining.
So we recovered in the IEP team in May to discuss the outcome. And when it was discussed that as parents, we wanted our child to stay in kindergarten another year. And again, we had to go through the policy. So we were looking for the bigger picture of our child. We want him to be retained accordingly so he can have a better future and have a chance. Again, we had to meet as an IEP team after we met with Troy Harsey, and that meeting was then Greg Fenton attended and held that meeting, and no other teacher was able to speak up. Greg Fenton did the speaking along with us.
Time is up.
So our next speaker tonight is Peter Burke.
Good evening. My name is Pete Burke. I'm Ruben's father. This dead ends us as to what we can do next with our son. Private schools do not provide the services supports he needs, and open enrollment is not a guarantee he would be accepted. We want to give our son a chance while he is at this young age. As explained, that is the backstory of my son. I'm here to challenge you. Throughout this process, there is not the instilled trust, transparency, and integrity that's supposed to be in public education and servant leadership on this governance body. We'd rather have a governing body that is using a governing body that is using their positions for their own personal gain. As we all know, your elected officials are elected by our community, and it also needs to be mentioned that our taxes pay the wages of the school district staff. Your elected officials to represent values, views, and a positive desired outcome for the public schools and leadership. Ultimately, your job is to ensure that the highest standard possible is set forth for this school's success and the community. What has really happened? We have heard countless times from members of the administration, the data shows. It's old listening, hearing to that. That is an educational malpractice to retain a student. It is the worst possible thing to do. Educators want to complicate it and want to remain overeducated on the simplest issues. Let me as a parent make the decisions, not the school staff that doesn't know my son. Rather educate us on what could happen. Where is the school district going to get into legal trouble for education malpractice or retaining a student? That is not anything black and white in the Wisconsin statute, chapter 118:15, paragraph 1. That concludes from this policy that my son falls under, and the verbiage that is contained in it is an agenda that is set forth by the governing body. Essentially, you are avoiding a red mark. Essentially, you guys are avoiding a red mark on the district. Big deal. Politics have been brought forth into my son's situation, but this body has allowed it. This is supposed to be a nonpartisan governing body, right? I am too educated and have explained to administrators that I can find evidence and that has backing on the opposite side. We can all get blue in the face debating it. Look how COVID has turned out. Using your position of authority and negatively impacting the future of children, especially my son, is not within the duties and mission that stands before you. That is educational malfeasance of who is all present today. The worst thing you can do for my son and others is refusing to let us as a parent be heard. We will not be our child will not be a number, which includes the dollar sign that's behind it. We will not play the game that has been given to him. We want this to occur now and give him the chance because it is only chance within his next 12 years to continue his positive routine of school, to prevent marginalization of himself, to continue to gain self-confidence, to get within the academic level of his age group. It is my son. If my son does get pushed forward, he will remain behind peers, will get marginalized, and I'm sure negative behavior and attitude will occur. The teaching staff knows this, and that's what we're trying to prevent. I do not want to see my son graduate in his senior year with an education that's below the standard that society is allowing today. Be the innovative governing body that defines the community of La Crosse. Make the news in a positive manner. Yes, I do understand tough decisions are going to be made in the future no matter what the future brings to this governing body. Creating that positive impact on your student body, helping you define character, identity, and values of a student is what needs to occur. How do you accomplish that from this governing body? Get out in the community, do your job, and show face, and walk with your head high. It's not happening. A more positive outcome will occur with the community if this happens. The public will get a better understanding of what needs to occur with the decision-making in this governance body. Yes, all your positions are more challenging than they ever have been. That means doing more than what is expected of you. In conclusion, we wanted what is right and best for our son. We are his parents, and we know him best, and we know him as best, and his parents should be. We should not be dead in and making decisions for your child. Unfortunately, this is where we are advocating for our son to give him the best future he deserves. As you go forth, please review this policy, make an informed decision, and hold your heads high, and be proud that every child will be given a chance, especially my son. I hope to hear back from all of you. I did talk to Aaron earlier today. There will be more to follow on this. I hope I hear from you guys on the board, somebody. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So we will move on to the superintendent's consent agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve items on the superintendent's consent agenda as presented.
So the consent agenda is a mechanism used by the board to deal with routine business that must come before the body. With a motion by Mr. Korberg and a second by Dr. Jimenez. The items on the superintendent's consent agenda are approved as presented unless there are items that members want to remove from the consent agenda. Hearing none, we'll approve as presented. Moving on to the board consent agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the items on the board consent agenda as presented.
Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Korberg and a second by Dr. Jimenez. We will approve the items on the board consent agenda unless there are items that members want to remove from the consent agenda. Are there any items? Hearing none, we will approve as presented, and we'll move on to our matters reserved for board action. And it looks like we have the annual academic standards notice for the upcoming 23-24 school year. Dr. Engel, do you have anything you want to?
Yeah, just a reminder that we brought this up at the board meeting on June 5th of this year. The annual approval by the School Board of Academic Standards is required by law, State Statute 120.12, paren 13. The DPI has a rigorous process to identify and reevaluate academic standards on an ongoing basis. School districts generally adopt the standards that the DPI adopts. Academic standards, this was the first meeting of the 23-24 school year, and so this is the first opportunity to approve those academic standards. So recommending approval.
So there's different years on here, I want to be clear. So we're basically approving the 23, 24. The rest of them are subject to change as life goes on. There's future years here, and just like I'm assuming this is like the capital budget. As things go on, sometimes they change as you get closer to that next year. Is that how this operates, or are we approving this for all these years in the future?
There's existing standards for all of the subjects, but the schedule that's provided indicates when the DPI reviews them in the
Okay.
future. So just kind of a heads up about the
Thank you.
process that the DPI has.
Thank you. Can you tell me more about so the initial implementation for a number of these on the schedule includes a standards-based report card. Can you tell me what that is?
So that initial implementation is the kind of alignment with how our school district addresses those change in standards. So when there's a change in standards from the DPI, it prompts some action here at the school district. We want to make sure that we review those standards and ensure that they continue to match and align with our standards-based report cards.
So what is the standards-based report card is my question.
It's a report card that provides more information to parents and students on how they're progressing in their classrooms. Historically, school districts might have provided just an A, B, or C as far as like a kind of a total summation of what a student did in the classroom. Standards-based grading and those report cards give students more information about how they're progressing in a variety of areas in their classes. You know, so when I was a biology teacher, you know, we might have a biochemistry standard and an ecology standard and an anatomy and physiology standard, and I was able to provide information on each of those areas to students along with notes on how they could improve. And so standards-based report cards give families and students more information in order to understand where they're at in that school or in that class, as opposed to just a single letter grade.
So that hasn't been implemented. It's going to be implemented this coming school year. Is that what I'm understanding according to the schedule?
As far as initial implementation here as it relates to standards, it's a review process of the standards that we have. So we've had standards-based report cards for elementary schools for a decade. You know, so it's very common practice here in La Crosse. At the high school level, we've been implementing that over the last 3 years, and so teachers have been working towards creating those report cards that provide that higher level of information to our students.
Is that type of report card required by DPI with their standards?
It is not.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so if there aren't any other clarifying questions, I'll consider a motion to adopt the standards.
I make a motion to adopt the Wisconsin academic standards in all disciplinary areas under section 118.1G.A.1 of the state statutes for the 2023-24 school year.
Second.
All right, so with a motion by Mr. Forberg and a second by Dr. Sprague, we'll do a voice vote on this one. So all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed?
Nay.
Aye. Sorry, that was for the.
Did you catch Katie's too? Yeah. All right, so we will move on to some information items. And I have a little bit of a thing I'll just mention before we go into it. So you'll see under the executive content that tonight is an opportunity we're not voting on this, on accepting the monitoring report yet. This is time to ask questions, to help get to the point where if you feel like you can support the superintendent's recommended action, you can. So a reminder that operational expectation policies are the gold standards for operations that the board expects the superintendent and district staff to follow as they carry out the duties that we have delegated to them. This is important to remember because we don't blindly trust that everything's going well. We ask that superintendent proves to us through all these operational expectation policies that that is happening. So Operational expectation 8, communicating and support for the board is important because it outlines what the superintendent must do to keep us informed of district issues, challenges, successes. I mean, really, if there's a disconnect there, we can't do our business. So keep that in mind as we go through that. So we're judging, we're not voting on this tonight, but as you read through it, consider that we're judging compliance based on the evidence that's given to us. Next time, there will be a matter reserved for board action section, similar to what we saw in the academic standards notice, where we will take action on that. And at that point, we'll also have the opportunity to review the indicators that were selected for monitoring OE8. And a reminder before we dig in that as we're reading through, if you have ideas about recommendations for how we want the report to come to us and that sort of thing, that we have to be mindful of how we ask for that. If the board decides that they need something different on this one report, we can do a vote and direct the superintendent that way. But as you ask the question, if you're like, you know, I want to see it like this, like that kind of gets into a weird gray area of a single person directing the superintendent or other district staff to do something. So that's my piece. We can move into OE8.
All right, so OE8, the expectation of OE8 is that the superintendent shall ensure that the board is fully supported and adequately informed about matters relating to board work and significant district concern. In the executive summary, we indicate that the superintendent certifies the following information is accurate and complete, and that the district is in compliance. In this report, you'll find evidence that the administration followed the board's work plan and provided comprehensive evidence and explanatory material in support of other monitoring reports and ad hoc issues, that the board was notified in a timely manner of incidents of public concern, that diverse viewpoints were solicited and incorporated into plans and documents to assist the board with decisions, that there was no encroachment by board members into the areas designated to the superintendent, that there were no complaints referred to the superintendent by the board, and that the board was notified of any significant changes to instructional practices or administrative policies. In the monitoring report, you'll see that the third page there is the policy itself, right after the cover letter. And that indicates each of the elements of the policy, which I will go through next. So OE 8.1 indicates that the superintendent will submit required monitoring data in a thorough, accurate, and understandable fashion according to the board's annual work plan schedule, and including both superintendent interpretations and relevant data to document compliance or reasonable progress. Indicator 1 indicates reports include or utilize data and artifacts to assist the board in verifying compliance. The evidence that we've provided is primarily located in board docs, which has a record of results and operational expectations monitoring reports submitted to the school board. Each of these reports includes data, artifacts, statements of assurances to assist the board in verifying compliance, and we put in a couple of examples there to highlight those. And indicator 2 is utilize the board's annual work plan. Administration submitted monitoring reports of all operational expectation policies and results policies according to the board's adopted annual work plan identified in GC 6-E. And there's a tracking document there that indicates the dates. Any questions about 8.1?
Can I just quickly clarify for those of us who are new, especially, we're looking at actions that took place before we took office as well.
Yeah, the look back date on this, and there's lots of different ways to approach it. For this one, it's generally the calendar year prior is what we're looking at. And that's a point that has been debated a little bit over time. You know, should it be a academic year? Should it be a year look back? And that's something the board can continue to mull over depending on the report and what makes the most sense.
Board member terms starting in April,
Right.
which is in the middle no matter what way you slice it. So
Yeah.
there's going to be look backs that are going to not include the newest board members.
Absolutely. All right, OE 8.2, the superintendent will provide for the board in a timely manner information about trends, facts, and other information relevant to the board's work. Indicator 1, in matters of urgent issues or imminent media coverage, the superintendent provides timely updates within 24 hours to the Board of Education. Evidence listed there are a series of dates and topics of emails sent to the school board on matters of urgent issues or imminent media coverage over the last year. In addition to that, there's often phone calls to the school board president if it's of a kind of a critical issue that might come up quickly. But that is something that is sent to all school board members. And indicator 2, in communication with the Board of Education, the superintendent provides relevant information. As evidence, workshops with the school board were held on the attached dates, discussing the indicated topics to provide relevant information to the Board of Education. And another source of evidence is a compliance documentation letter that indicates that board updates were provided regularly to school board members via email, and that board members were copied on all staff email updates from July 18th through July 17th of this year. Any questions regarding OE 8.2? All right, OE 8.3, the superintendent will inform the board of significant transfers of money within funds or other changes substantially affecting the district's financial condition. Indicator 1, the superintendent informs the board of significant transfers of money within funds or other changes substantially affecting the district's financial condition. As evidence, the annual audit presented to the school board on January 9th of this year indicated that operating budgets are adopted each fiscal year for all governmental funds in accordance with section 65.90 of the Wisconsin statutes. Budgetary expenditure control is exercised at the funding level, and reporting budget amounts are as originally adopted or as amended by Board of Education resolution. And a second source of evidence, the school board approved end-of-year budget amendments on June 26th of this year. The budget amendment explanation provided by the Executive Director of Business Services describes that budget amendment process and the reasons for the changes in this year's budget amendment. Any questions regarding 8.3? OE 8.4, the superintendent will ensure the board has adequate information from a variety of internal and external viewpoints to ensure informed board decisions. Indicator 1, provide adequate information for board members to fulfill their elected responsibilities. During board workshops and as a part of informational items, the superintendent provided relevant background information and variables which are used as the basis for decision-making on the following issues. Those included monitoring reports attachments found in board docs, budget development presentation, conditional enrollments, which were closed session information items, Lincoln Middle School closure and secondary boundary lines recommendation, the ending of the year-round program at Hamilton, and the task force information that came there, and then the non-recurring referendum recommendation. And then the second indicator, superintendent considers a variety of viewpoints and communication to the Board of Education. As evidence, the district leadership team and policy review committee provide insight and feedback on new policies and procedures. Another source of evidence, in developing the school district's long-range facility plan, the superintendent developed a facility advisory committee made up of a diverse group of individuals that represent the community and met on the dates indicated there. And evidence met with student groups, including Student Senate, to understand the views of students regarding a range of issues, including mental health and the Code of Rights and Responsibilities. And the dates of meetings are indicated there. And another source of evidence, held meetings at every building and online to solicit feedback from teachers on a proposed compensation model, the dates of which are listed there. Another source of evidence, met with employee leadership groups regularly through the joint leadership process on the dates indicated there. Held community informational sessions regarding 2 referenda on the dates listed. Evidence convened a review task force committee of the 4515 program at Hamilton, made up of staff, community members, and family members to review the program and make recommendations. And it indicates the dates that the group met. And last piece of evidence, Middle School Consolidation Committee was convened, made up of 63 teachers and administrators to prepare for the potential consolidation of the middle schools and implement the essential tasks. And so those pieces of evidence provide support for OE 8.4.
For 8.4 indicator 1, consideration for potentially adding in a time frame for providing that information to the board, like potentially at a minimum when the board agenda comes out, so that the board has some time to deliberate that information before the board meeting. I noticed we don't have a time frame, and I think it would be good for the future to ensure that there's at least enough time for board members to review that information. And I think if it comes out at a minimum at the time the board agenda comes out, that should be sufficient. But that would be a recommendation I would make at the next meeting for a change. But I just thought I'd throw that out there now.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
All right, any other questions regarding 8.4? All right, OE 8.5.
I actually do have a question on 8.4. We're evaluating meetings that didn't occur regarding the Facility Advisory Committee, because you've got dates listed here that haven't occurred yet. Shouldn't this document only include things you actually did or participated in as a monitoring report?
Certainly could. We just threw those in there to indicate that that work is present and ongoing.
Is that under indicator 2?
Indicator 2, it's the second piece of evidence.
The rest of them appear to be meetings that did occur, which proved as evidence.
That, or maybe you can change it even to had occurred or are occurring.
We can certainly remove those. It's not a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's because it said to get input from the public or whatever, and I think it's the ones you did attend, and you did schedule the other ones. I think giving you credit for that work as well, I think is fair, but I think they didn't occur, so.
Clarity, yeah.
We can note that in there at a minimum.
I do appreciate, though, the fact that we have the dates that are upcoming, that this work is still ongoing, and so I wouldn't want to necessarily lose that, but I also recognize Ms. Supla's point. So, maybe that's just a little bit of the narrative. I'm not trying to specify how to do it, but I do think it is a good thing to add in that this work is ongoing, whereas others, the work has concluded. And so that's why there are no more future dates listed.
Can easily indicate scheduled or forthcoming or something.
I just think, I don't want to lose that, and I think it's a good piece of information to have.
And definitely clarify to an outside viewer, like why there are future events on there. There was some, it was like to be held or something like that.
Is there another meeting or point or report in which that same information would be presented to us? Or is there a benefit to, I think as Juan says, like having it on this specific compliance report?
Maybe in like OE 12, where we do
Which is at
the
like another
facility,
time.
which would be in,
May of next year.
Yeah, otherwise, if we
So
lose
it's not
those dates.
timely then, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if we lose those dates, they'll show up in the next monitoring report, which is a year from now.
Right.
So that's why I feel like it's not necessarily a bad thing, but I do get Ms. Supla's point.
yeah,
Mhm.
just so it looks like we're not cooking the books.
Well, I mean, it's just, again, a big standard that we hold is we look at evidence of what has occurred. What has occurred is some meetings were held, some meetings are scheduled. I think that's fair to say to the public.
Yeah.
OE 8.5, the superintendent will advise the board of changes and assumptions upon which board policy has been established. Indicator 1, all major changes of assumptions were communicated to the board. Evidence, there were no major changes of assumption for this last calendar year. It's helpful to just kind of look at the definition indicated above, which is any foundational changes in federal or state education policy that may require a change in the board's foundational premises of coherent governance. For example, when Act 10 came in, or QEO, or other major shifts. The other piece of evidence we threw in is that the biennial budget has the capacity to make foundational changes to the school district every 2 years, and the board was provided updates via email and at board meetings on the state's biennial budget process on the dates listed there. Nothing came to fruition other than some changes to, financial policy, but that doesn't foundationally shift our school district at this point. And so that is all we have for OE 8.5. OE 8.6, the superintendent will inform the board of anticipated significant media coverage. Indicator 1, there are 0 complaints by board members that they were uninformed about wide-scale media coverage. The attached compliance documentation letter indicates there were no complaints by school board members that they were uninformed about wide-scale media coverage. The definition there means all of newspaper, radio, and television, which has happened on occasion, but no complaints.
I have a question about the complaint. And I know we've talked about complaints before in terms of not communication in terms of what the board is doing with you, but more of like you with the community. Like a complaint would be an official, like this is an official complaint. Because you definitely receive feedback from us pretty regularly, but that's not up to that point of like a complaint.
Yeah, I think in this case, because it's a little different than a formal complaint process, I would imagine a school board member would reach out to the board president and say like, hey, there's this really big thing and we got no notice, no heads up of it within, X number of hours. And so I think this would be a less formal process, but somebody would reach out to the board president, or that would be like the best way to catalog that happened. They could certainly complain to me, but, and I would note that, of course, but, if there's a complaint to the board president regarding a lack of information around media coverage, that would register here.
Can I ask a question? Why would that, wouldn't you assume there's going to be media coverage? Coming from where I did, I'm just used to media coverage every time we had a meeting, so I guess it surprises me we have this in here where you have to give us notice of media coverage. I would assume there's going to be times that we're going to have media coverage no matter what. So I guess I'm questioning why this was part of it, and is there reasoning behind it?
Yeah, I think the policy, indicating support for the board, so it's my job to ensure that the board feels supported and has the information you need. Media coverage is something that when the board developed this policy, they felt was important to be aware of in advance. Now, if it's a school board meeting, that's one thing, but let's say it's a bomb threat at a school or a fire at Central, right? The board wants to be, through its policy, notified of those sorts of things if it seems like it would reach that wide level of media scrutiny. And holding the superintendent accountable for that is reasonable, I think.
Basically a heads up.
Don't want to be caught at the grocery store not knowing what's going on, right?
That's just normal for me.
And I think it's like a protective, like some policies change behavior and some policies like reinforce. Yeah, like things are going okay, the policy's there, and everyone knows it, but if it goes the wrong way, then there's that opportunity to point out it's in policy that we need to have that kind of notice.
I totally understand that, but there's some that are much better probably on their email than I am, and others, I'm assuming. And, like with the council, mine was linked to my phone, and that's what I use for business 99% of the time. So, you could send it to me, and I would miss it most likely unless you know, obviously I'm preparing for the meetings, but other than that, there's a good chance. So I don't know if there's a different method or what, but that's why I questioned it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as it relates to, board members' preferred communication method, I'm happy to adopt whatever works best for you. And if I send out emails to some, and that's just hard for some people to access, as it often is during the day for some folks, I am happy to send text messages to some, or we can ensure that folks get phone calls as well. We didn't always have email, and we still contacted folks regularly about these things. It's still possible with, any communication system we have. So we're happy to adopt whatever meets the board's needs there.
Thank you.
OE 8.7, the superintendent will, if in the superintendent's opinion, the board or individual members have encroached into areas of responsibility assigned to the superintendent, or if the board or its members are non-compliant with any of its GC or BSR policies, the superintendent will inform the board using the following process, and it lists A, B, and C, kind of escalating from a private conversation to a meeting with the board president and more and further. Indicator 1, the superintendent reports the specifics of any significant noncompliance with any governance culture or board superintendent relations policies by board members to the board president or board as a whole. The attached compliance documentation letter indicates there were 0 reports of significant noncompliance with those policies. And then the second indicator is the superintendent informs the board president, or individual members if, in the superintendent's opinion, the board or individual members have encroached into areas of responsibility assigned to the superintendent. The attached compliance documentation letter indicates there were no reported incidents of encroachment there. Pretty straightforward. OE 8.8, the superintendent will present information in simple and concise form, indicating clearly whether the information is incidental, intended for decision preparation, or for formal monitoring. Indicator 1, board agendas. Board agendas are organized so that agenda items are clearly organized as for communication, for monitoring or results, or compliance, or for action. Evidence board docs holds records of board agendas with their associated organization, indicating distinct sections for each portion of the meeting, including monitoring of board policies and for information items, consent agenda items, and announcements. And then another piece of evidence, the superintendent provides context for agenda items that come before the board as necessary to clarify the purpose of the agenda item and the board's role in addressing the agenda item. And there are 2 examples of meeting notes, which are the things that I often read before an agenda item to provide that context. And those notes are listed there, but you could also find them in the recordings of our meetings as well. And a second indicator, the superintendent presents information in a simple and concise form, indicating clearly whether the information is incidental, intended for decision preparation, or for formal monitoring. The following items indicate the superintendent presented information in a simple and concise form with the appropriate action by the board given. The organization of the board agendas continues to provide that information. Information presented for monitoring reports yielded no material requests for additional information over this last year. And board meeting agenda items that were non-monitoring in nature but required board action were presented with explanatory information to let the board know why the information was being presented and what the expectation of the board was. And examples of that are the AGR report, academic standards, and the budget amendment.
So based on your comments prior to this agenda item, Madam President, I'm not sure quite how to say this, but on indicator number 1 about the board agenda being organized, I mean, a board agenda is really the responsibility of the board, not the staff. And so I wouldn't view that as a requirement for our staff person. I think how they provide support for those agenda items that are set by the board makes more sense. And I think that maybe appears in the other indicators. I'm not sure I understand maybe the intent behind indicator number 1.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying for sure. So we did approve that indicator before, so for this monitoring report, we would leave it. But for the next one, that could be one we could omit since it is the responsibility of the board president ultimately.
Aaron, do you have any rationale for why that one appears under there?
I wasn't here when these policies were developed or the indicators chosen.
What's the history of it then?
Traditionally, if you, like the way WASB would define the creation of agenda, it's typically a collaboration between the board president and the superintendent. And so the superintendent does have a significant role in developing that agenda. It is ultimately the board's, and it is ultimately the board president's responsibility, but the way it's been defined and talked about everywhere I've been is it's kind of a joint endeavor because administration is responsible for supporting the board in their work. And so given that responsibility in the process, it makes sense to a certain extent to hold the superintendent accountable for ensuring that work goes off well. That said, at the end of the day, to Ms. Sukla's point, it is the board's responsibility ultimately.
To add to that, as the board president, yes, you are responsible for the agenda, but the president is not entering it into board docs. So, that is a matter for the superintendent and or his staff to ensure that that's entered in, but it is with the board president's conversation, like Dr. Engel said, it is a mutual work that is being done. It is decided by the president, but they are the ones that are entering it into board docs. So that was the idea behind it. But again, this is a new board, new decisions, and if we don't see that this has value, then it doesn't have value, and we as a board can decide to amend it.
I guess in keeping with the, OE8 is about the superintendent informing the board, so maybe in the future, this indicator could be changed to, because in my previous life, my job was to work with a committee chair as well, and my job was to make sure that they knew what I thought agenda items should be or what things were coming up should be discussed. It was their decision whether it was on the agenda or not, but I had a responsibility to make some recommendations, so maybe it looks more like that instead of the way it's written, that there's a responsibility on the superintendent to make sure that they recommend appropriate actions or that the board chair considers appropriate actions to put on the agenda. Thank you.
I think I see your point on that. I think what I would add is that the evidence of superintendent providing context for certain agenda items is something that I really value and something that it doesn't necessarily need to be its own indicator, but if we find that this one is superfluous, that is an element I would like to see retained somehow.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think those are really good points. And so when we look at the template that we'll approve for the next cycle, we'll have the opportunity to adjust that indicator. I know I can see Aaron taking notes as we're talking too. But for just a reminder though, for this one, we're looking at the evidence for the already approved indicator, which is really a struggle for me sometimes as we're thinking about the present task at hand and then also wanting to have the discussion that's relevant for looking at the template at our next meeting for the future indicators. So yeah, I think those were all great points.
All right, OE 8.9, a superintendent will treat all members impartially and ensure that all members have equal access to information. Indicator 1, materials for board meetings and for workshop sessions are distributed to board members equally and at the same time. Evidence, the attached compliance documentation letter indicates that materials for board meetings and for workshop sessions were distributed equally and at the same time. There were no complaints from board members that materials were accessible to some board members before others.
I guess the only thing I would say there is to go back to my comment in 8.4, maybe adding a time frame. Maybe this is the better place for that, for our conversation next month or next meeting. It was just that 8.4 had more information than just what was listed in this indicator, but maybe that's something for us to discuss next meeting. So I just added that for us to consider.
OE 8.10, the superintendent will inform the board in a timely manner of any actual or anticipated noncompliance with any board operational expectations policy or any anticipated failure to achieve reasonable progress towards any results policy. Indicator 1, the superintendent informs the board during the monitoring process of any actual or anticipated failure to make reasonable progress towards results goals. Evidence, the administration did not indicate the board anticipated failure to make reasonable progress towards results goals, and both results policies were marked as making reasonable progress by both the administration and the board. And the board was informed during the monitoring process that 3 operational expectation policies, OE4, 10, and 11, were categorized by administration as in compliance, but with exceptions noted. A new process was implemented with OE10 this last year, whereby action plans were created to address these specific indicators that were found to be not in compliance. While that is not an expectation under this policy, it's something that we just wanted to highlight as a new practice moving forward, so that there is something to follow up on by the board and our community when we don't meet our expectations.
So in the evidence here, the indicator, and I was trying to parse through that color-coded attachment on this. This essentially means that in none of those previous reports was there an indication of failure to make reasonable progress, excuse me. And then the board agreed at those meetings, right?
I believe that's correct,
Okay.
and we notified the board when we thought we might not meet all of our expectations.
Right, so the indicator of progress with exceptions noted.
Mhm.
Right, okay.
We were transparent about our progress, and it was confirmed by the board. OE 8.11, the superintendent will provide for the board adequate information about all administrative actions and decisions that are delegated to the superintendent, but required by law to be approved by the board. Indicator 1, the board takes action at meetings on all items required by law to be approved by the board. As evidence, there is action documented in board docs on the items listed below there, including approval of budget amendments, achievement gap reduction report, Wisconsin academic standards adoption, employee handbooks approved, operating referendum resolution, approval of the closure of Lincoln Middle School, open enrollment vacancies, annual financial audit report, the annual approval of budget levy and community service fund levy, approval of the proposed budget, fund balance designations, capital referendum resolutions, and employment reports in action on a bi-monthly basis. OE 8.12, the superintendent will inform the board in a timely manner of the final disposition of complaints referred to the superintendent by the board. Indicator 1, the superintendent will provide an update to the board regarding the conclusion of any investigation of a complaint brought to the superintendent by the board. The attached compliance documentation letter indicates there were no complaints brought to the superintendent by the board over the last calendar year. OE 8.13, the superintendent will inform the board in advance of any deletions of, additions to, or significant modifications of any administrative policies and any instructional programs. Indicator 1, the superintendent will provide for the board annual updates which include changes to significant changes, any significant changes to the instructional program. The evidence there, board accepted the action taken by the Cooley Montessori set team to continue E2 through 6th grade at the elementary Cooley Montessori school site and discontinued the adolescent program on March 6th. And the board was involved and notified through a workshop of the ending of the year-round school model at Hamilton Elementary on February 6th. Indicator 2, the superintendent will provide for the board any and all updates to administrative policies. Administrative policies were reviewed by the Policy Review Committee and were formally posted on the school district website, and school board was notified via email on July 11th.
It's just a little bit of grammar cleanup on that one.
Yes, I am making that note. Any further questions on any indicators or the report as a whole?
At this point, I wouldn't have a concern with listing OE8 as being in compliance, given the evidence that's been provided.
Yeah, and a reminder is we use the reasonable person standard, which is always hard to define, but if you're
you know, digesting all of the evidence that's been given to us, would a reasonable person judge compliance on this report? So that's kind of the way to,
I will just bring up that, you know, for the newly elected group, it seems, I guess, different, it was the best word to put it, that we are okaying something that's been in the past that we weren't part of, so it's a little
yeah,
bizarre to
yeah.
make that as part of our vote, but I understand the process, but it's,
Mhm.
yeah, I wish it could be a little bit different, because we're gonna run into this, I'm assuming, more often than not, correct?
Every
Yeah.
year.
Yeah,
Yes.
so if three
Unless
people
you have
come
the
on
same
every
board,
single
but
year,
yes.
yeah, and we could always change our work plan for where some of these fall. Since we've received this one, we could change it for like the next year to fall at a different time, so that if 3 new people get on the board next year, it'll make more sense in that. But we can talk about what makes most, like where it would fall, because if we do school year, as Dr. Jimenez noted, you're still having a weird chunk of time where people are elected in April. If you're doing calendar year, you do it right away in April.
There's also consideration as to when data is available,
Mhm.
because sometimes it's not available from the state until later in the calendar year. And so while it may be good timing for the board, it may not be good timing to get the data to give you what you're looking for as board members. So that's also a consideration to take into account.
I think to Mr. Newmeister's point, this one could be one that moved into March. You know, it kind of captured a board member's term, you know, and then you could judge at the end of that term, like, did you feel like you were supported as a board member? The next board can take it up in the next year. That, for this one, the logical time might be more March than, you know, 3 months into the term of 4 new folks.
Right. That would make sense because this is rooted in communication. It's like, yes, I could scroll back through all the emails and read all the old board docs from before my tenure, but that seems, I don't know, frankly, like busy work. So.
Absolutely.
I'll just say regarding the work plan, it's a challenge. It's a challenge to try to space reports out. Otherwise, you end up with months with a whole bunch of reports and some without, so you try to even it out. As Dr. Jimenez said, it depends on when data is available. It depends on how the school year falls, and if this is a full school year thing. It is, no matter how you do it, it's never right, and it's always imperfect, and it's been a struggle for you. It's not a new struggle, I guess I'll just say that.
Yeah, you said it.
I will say, though, I just really struggle with this process myself personally on providing an unofficial agreement or not agreement, because if somebody agrees or disagrees now, but they change their vote at the next meeting, that just seems,
So we won't
wonky
have
to
it in
me.
the consent agenda. So at that point, you could make a motion, you know, any number of ways. And there's usually in the executive content little options, like you can accept with
Exceptions.
I see all the
exceptions
options
noted, you
listed.
can deny, yeah. So
I just, it says this opportunity for the board to discuss and unofficially indicate compliance, and that unofficial thing.
Well, to give you an example, there were conversations we've had in previous boards that I have sat in on where we felt that without specific data or more information provided, we could not make a determination. And so at this point in time, if we didn't get that data, it would be approval with exceptions noted. But if we were to get that information between now and when we vote, we could potentially be fine with a compliance. And so it also gives the administration an opportunity to provide more information if we feel that it is not adequate. So that was the intent of the unofficial vote, is to say, well, right now, I think that we have enough evidence to say we're in compliance, or, you know, we're missing some pieces of information. And so if we don't get that information, then we may have to vote either with exceptions noted or with, not meeting expectations. So it's not necessarily we're holding your feet to the fire. It is just giving the administration an indication of, is there more work for them to do in order to meet the standard we're looking for, or are we good?
I don't disagree with the potential for requesting additional information.
All right, any other comments about this one before we move on? Okay, we'll move on to 7.02. A reminder, we'll see that OE8 as a matter reserved for board action on the agenda. It will not appear in the consent agenda, so we'll have an opportunity. We've had some discussion now. If we need to have more discussion, yeah, absolutely can. But we'll have a formal vote, not next week, but the next time we meet.
Thank you for that change.
And we'll have time to talk recommendations for the upcoming.
Yeah, so I know you've made a lot of notes about ideas for indicators and things. We'll have, lately, we've seen them come as information items when the template for that policy review comes forward. So if I'm remembering correctly, like there was one recently where there was 2 highlighted new indicators that showed up. And so that information item gave us an opportunity to discuss, and then if we agreed, it went in the consent agenda to approve the template and the new indicators for the next. Is that correct, Laura? Is that how we did it before for that one? Okay.
So next month, you'll have an opportunity to approve the OE as well as to review the indicators for the following year.
Correct. Think of this meeting as looking back, and then the next meeting is looking forward.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And so at the next meeting, then, what we'll see will potentially include some of your revisions?
Yes,
And we'll approve
we're
them or
always
not.
thinking about ways to improve this or, change things, and then we're also listening at the board table and want to provide something that meets the board's expectations and at least provides an opportunity for discussion.
Okay.
So the other thing I'll note that we discussed in some of the coherent governance workshops is the indicators are written by the administration. So we can't wordsmith it to death, even if we want to. But we can reject it and say, nope, not
Try
good
again.
enough, come back. These are the things these are our values. This is kind of what we were thinking. Come back and prove that that indicator matches that. Okay. So we'll move on to the 2023-24 proposed budget instructional priorities item. Dr. Engel?
The presentation of the instructional priorities are a part of the monitoring process for OE5 financial planning. The budget development process is a long one, and elements of the budget book are presented from May through October to spread out that information so it's present at relevant times. It starts with the administrative goals, which were previously presented. Tonight, Dr. Harsey is presenting the instructional priorities upon which critical elements of our budget are built. And so I will turn it over to Dr. Harsey.
Thank you. This is one of the rare times that Ms. Sprang and I get to kind of tag team. And so I'm going to steal a little thunder if I can. Generally, she gets to open up for me and makes me feel very, very good by talking about how instruction is the largest program expenditure and the district's highest financial priority. It sets the stage for the importance of tonight's report. And while I have a knack for turning a 3-minute briefing into a 10-minute report and 10 minutes into 45 minutes, I'll do my best to be brief. But I do want to set the foundation for why tonight is incredibly valuable and important. Generally, it's about the instructional piece is about historically maybe 51% of the budget, but I also want to add in the fact that instructional support, which we couldn't do our due diligence for students without services like social work, guidance, school psychologists, nurses, occupational therapists, adds another 25% or so. So in total, we're talking about 76% generally approximately of the district's budget. And so when I have this moment to talk, insert a little bit with the budget book, I'd just like to set the stage for the importance of what we're trying to accomplish. One of the things I like to highlight with this report is not only importance financially, but then what we try to do with alignment. So we start when we're talking about our instructional priorities with things like the board's 5 bulleted items in our mission statement. We also look at our administrative goals, the 5 items that were approved by the board on May 1st. And so all of our content area coordinators who are lead teachers, so when we talk about, voice and inclusion in part of this, there's a variety of teacher voices in leadership positions, and our programs supervisors and directors, of course. All of those folks are looking at operational expectations, then of course the data, right? The results policies that you see Dr. Lahaki generally coming to the board with. All of that is part of the why and how we lead to the instructional priorities year over year. Ms. Sukala will remember probably when this was a 20-page document that was inserted into the budget book years ago. We have streamlined it so that it's a singular page, but I will point out that there is a 9-page link in here that comes to the board according to the board's work plan in September. And so the larger document is still available. We put that link in there because while it's not the main subject of tonight's discussion, we will be looking at that in September with OE11, the instructional program report, coming here in a couple of months. I would like to point out a couple of these priorities and then take any questions. The foundation for what we do really started in March of 2021 when Dr. Engel presented to the board at that time the instructional, our educational equity plan, and it remains the foundation for all the decisions that we make. In fact, the next several items that you see are based out of educational equity. And so it remains part of our journey because we're not there yet. You've seen some of the results already, even the newly constituted board members. You've seen that we're not proportionate in some of our data, whether it's behavioral, discipline, et cetera. We've got work to do. And so it remains one of our instructional priorities as we go forward. Early literacy and numeracy, when you approved the academic standards today, you saw what you're seeing here actually in my brief description with Orton Gillingham training. Maybe you've heard the science of reading in the popular press, and the Envision math curriculum at the elementary level. These are some efforts that if you look at the larger 9-page document, you'll see those written in that document by our program leaders. The standards-based learning, Ms. Sukala was asking some questions about that already, and Dr. Engel spoke to that also earlier tonight. This has been an effort that's been several years in the making. Ms. Cheryl, who I see is in the audience, would tell you that the elementary level, it's been happening for quite many years. At the high school, secondary level, we're working towards that effort and still have some work to do. So that will continue on this year. And then engaging in schooling, going into COVID and then coming out of COVID, we've had a struggle in a variety of areas, including having students attend school. And I don't want this to sound trite, but students can't benefit from any of our instruction when they're not in school. And so we've had efforts, maybe you've seen some of our banners, attendance matters and the like. And that's just part of our effort. We've got efforts around something called a whole child framework that includes a lot of the support staff efforts that I had mentioned earlier with the budget book. And those efforts need to continue. We've had students come to the board table talking about mental wellness and the efforts that are necessary there. And we're trying to bridge that gap between the ample resources that the school district La Crosse provides and our students being able to access those resources. And so we need to make sure that we're just making that connection, that students and families understand that we've got resources for students and families. Let's make sure that they're aware of them and that we're matching it correctly. So that I'll keep it brief with this particular piece, knowing that we've got a lot more coming in September. But with that, I'll gladly take any questions that folks might have here tonight.
Questions from board members?
I just think our priorities really need to be focused. That engaging in school really reminded me, and I'm not sure if this, I'm not sure, or maybe you do, if this board is really aware of the truancy issue, the depth of the truancy issue, not just in our district, but everywhere. What COVID has, how it has disconnected students from schools is, it blows my mind. It is just, it's awful how many students are not engaged in school, how many students and families are not connected, how many students are so woefully behind. Connecting with school seems like the last thing on their mind, and if they have any siblings, that goes down the line with the family. So, I mean, continuing to work extremely hard to get students in school I think is vital, and also helping students catch up what they have lost because of COVID. What has been lost through COVID is not anybody at this table's fault, obviously, but we have a lot of work to do to get our students caught up because of what's happened with COVID. And quite frankly, if you ask me in one sentence what our instructional priority should be, it's rebuilding what we've lost through COVID. I think that just absolutely has to be our absolute top priority. And again, the engaging in schooling, while you have it, it's a blinding flash, the obvious. I don't know that it's obvious to a lot of people how deep that issue really is in terms of the number of students that are not connected with school and are not attending school and not getting an education. It scares me what the future means for those students and their families.
Absolutely, thank you for that. And we've got some extensive efforts going on there. And while it's not on our agenda tonight, Mr. Kurt Teff there is working with the county and the city very closely to ensure that we get the best possible support for our students to show up every day. And we are thankful for the passage of the operating referendum, which allows us to keep academic and behavior coaches in our elementary schools, which will help with that remediation on a daily basis with our students. So.
I guess the other piece I'll add is what Troy Hersey said about connecting students to mental health and other types of support, not just in the district, but we as a district also have an obligation to connect our students to the community resources. And this community is particularly rich in those resources. So we want to make sure we aren't reinventing the wheel, but really using those resources as wisely as we can in connecting our students, because when they're not in our district anymore, where do they turn? So,
absolutely.
Thank you.
I just want to commend the administration on ensuring that we use the strategic plan for educational equity as the foundation of everything that we do. It is, in my opinion, a statement of from this district stating that all are welcome, and that we will welcome you where you are in order to ensure that you can meet your academic and career goals. If we did not have that, I'd be concerned as to what foundation we would have. I think it speaks volumes to what it is we're actually trying to accomplish, especially in this world post-COVID. So I think it is a foundational document, and it is the foundation of everything we do, and it buoys the other priorities that you've listed here. So I commend you for that.
Thank you.
I think while it's brought up about our students, we also have to remember, and we're going to continue to work with our staff, who was also greatly affected, not only with COVID, but budget cuts and their desire needs to do their jobs adequately as well. So I commend everyone for their hard work, but obviously we do still have some work to do on that front.
Absolutely. All right. So we will move on now to announcements, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Sprague.
I have a multi-page comprehensive report on my 3 CISA meetings so far. No, I have recently attended the annual conference and several other meetings of the Board of Control. I'm still in learning mode at CISA and everything that they do, but from what I have seen and the relationships I've started to build there, CISA 4 is in a really great position to continue to provide a lot of support, in particular to our rural partner districts around us. one of the interesting things that happened at the annual meeting a few weeks back. We got a good presentation on School Finance 101 for board members from Mike Berry, who Patty probably knows well. And that was really interesting to engage in conversation with my colleagues from other districts who are experiencing similar challenges to us, but from entirely different viewpoints and perspectives and with different sets of experience. And that was interesting. And one other item of note, I think, is they recently, we approved the purchase of new vehicles to further strengthen the capacity of the cohort of traveling instructional supports and nurses and clinical travelers. I don't know what all of their roles are, but that who serve all of the region around us. And so CISA is looking to sort of up its impact and be able to provide more resources around the region. So. And I was duly reelected also, even though La Crosse, as the largest district, I guess by tradition, has a permanent spot on CISA 4. But they did elect me.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we will move on to Ms. Berkedahl. Katie, can you hear us? Do you have any announcements tonight from La Crosse Public Education Foundation?
Nope, not tonight.
Okay, thank you. So my own announcements. As you probably heard, the City Council chose to deny our appeal to seek to overturn that historic designation for Lincoln Middle School. Thank you to Ms. Sprang and Mr. Ledvina and Board Member Jackson for being present and speaking. We will just move on and make our path forward with that. And we'll have more information on the RFQ process and timelines on that coming soon. But that's all I have today.
My announcements, legislative update. I sent this via email, but the governor signed the budget, the biennial budget. It does take a little while for them to figure out what that exactly means for schools. And so while we've got some pretty good indication of some numbers to put into our budgetary models, we are still waiting for the final assessment from DPI on what to adjust where to know those final outcomes. And so reassuring in some ways and disappointing in others, as every budget is. As long as you get some of the reassuring part, you feel okay about it. So we're busy figuring out those final numbers, and we'll be able to start to present some stuff to the board here in the near future. Our FAC committee, or Facility Advisory Committee, will have their fourth meeting on Wednesday, July 19th from 6 to 8:30 at Hogan Administrative Building. These meetings are posted and open to the public, and all the information for these meetings, as well as recordings, are made available on our website. So for anyone that's interested in kind of observing that process and keeping up to date, it's all very publicly available.
Will any of those meetings occur in other buildings?
We've chosen to hold them all here at Hogan Administrative Center for consistency. And then Central is reopening. I think it reopened on Friday. I think we got all the work done there after the fire that happened about a month ago. I just want to thank the contractors who worked with us so diligently to get the work done in an expedited manner. We're very thankful to their efforts, and of course to our buildings and grounds folks who did whatever was necessary to keep as much of the building open and to support our students this summer. We had summer school running there. The gyms are used 24/7, it feels like, and so we're thankful that we could get some of it open, and we're able to continue to operate a portion of that building. It was touch and go. It's a rare situation where a school district or a business these days has its own transformer. That's usually something that the power companies take care of these days. And so for us to find an available transformer that met our needs, it involved a nationwide search, and we found one in Baraboo. So fortunate to be able to get back online and make those adjustments, and we'll be working towards future-proofing that building so we don't find ourselves in that situation again in the future. So thank you to our Director of Facilities, Joe Ledvina, and his crew. Thank you so much. So that's it.
Great. All right, we will move on to agenda planning.
I'll make a motion to approve the August 7th, 2023 Board of Education agenda with any additions or corrections.
So with a motion by Mr. Korberg and a second by Dr. Garcia, we will approve the agenda without any additions or corrections. We'll do a voice vote on this one. So all those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed? Okay, it's passed. And we'll move on to our board debriefing. So just a reminder, trying some new stuff. Last week I led the board debriefing, and this week Mr. Korberg has agreed to do it.
A couple things here. As far as what we did well, I think talking about instructional priorities and somewhat what's on the docket for the upcoming year and some of the concerns shared by people as far as what will be a good impact on our students and their outcomes. I think that was was constructive. I didn't really have anything that didn't go well, and then as far as needing to improve, I think it kind of goes with the suggested changes that we have an opportunity to update our OEs as we move along, and I think that information that we talked about, and hopefully we'll have some good discussion next time about any kinds of ways to improve on those OEs that we are dealing with. So that's kind of what I had.
Any other comments from board members?
I think the only comment I would have that maybe we could try to do better in the summer. I think we have opportunities during the quote-unquote regular school year, but we do have buildings that are already started. But that is more of a focus on students. And so either a school showcase or a recognition, or trying to get more about what is going on inside our school buildings and reminding ourselves that that is the focus of the work we do would be a positive thing to do in the future.
All right, thank you, Mr. Korberg.
Yep.
Again, we can always revisit that process. If it feels tedious, we can change. So this is just a new thing. But we do have it in our policies that we do these board debriefings regularly. For new members, it feels weird, but it's part of our policy, so we do it. All right, so finally we'll move on to adjourn. Is there a motion? Do we need a motion for that?
We don't need a motion.
Okay. So we will adjourn. We'll take a 5-minute recess before moving on to the workshop, which will be right in this building. So take 5 minutes for a bio and tech break.